Number 26, Blasphemous. So this is a Metroidvania game that is heavily inspired by Dark Souls, and you will see it immediately. Like, people, for instance, say that Hollow Knight is kind of like a Souls-like, and you do see things reminiscent of the Souls games in that as well. But here it's just fucking everywhere, you know, from the death screen to the overall aesthetic and lore. So obviously I am first of all going to recommend everyone that played and enjoyed Dark Souls to give this game a try. But don't be mistaken, the game like stands on its own 2 feet. I actually played this before I played any Souls games and before I was familiar with any of them, and I still ended up really fucking enjoying it because regardless of what it's inspired by, the game itself has impeccable art direction, really fun gameplay, and an excellently designed map, all to be enjoyed on their own merits. It's just a great game, honestly. Probably exactly what you're expecting based on the footage and reviews that you've seen, if you've seen any. There's not really much else to say. Play it and see it for yourself. Number 27 and 28, Trine 1 and 2. We're doing a double feature with these 2 games since they're basically the same game. It's just that Trine 2 looks better and is a little longer. I think that the main draw of these games and why they're beloved is because for their budget and team size, the production quality is really up there. The second game especially looks fucking incredible, like the water effects and everything in that one, the particles, it's just all really gorgeous to look at. It's really polished and feels good to play as well. It's just that these feel more like tech demos than games. Artistically, it, like I said, looks great, but doesn't really have an identity of its own. I feel it's just this whimsical, magical, like Disney-esque style, and the story is as standard as it gets to. The whole premise, everything from the enemies to the characters and their abilities, is just all so textbook, you know? Like, it really feels like a game ChatGPT would come up with if you told it to create a video game in a fantasy setting without any further specifications. It's just so standard. It really feels like these games were first and foremost a showcase for the visual fidelity and the physics engine. That all being said, don't think that I dislike these games at all. I don't. I'm just trying to set everyone's expectations correctly with my brief review. Like, the lasting impressions that you will get from this game, what you will remember about this game down the line, is it's a pretty fun way to spend an evening with your friends finishing this game co-op, and a nice relaxing game to listen to a podcast while you're playing if you're solo, which is fine because sometimes that's all you need, you know. You don't always need a game that is trying to say things or make you feel things. Sometimes you just want to, you know, take a break from that and as a palate cleanser just mindlessly hit some goblins and play around with some physics puzzles and do some basic platforming. Plus the games are pretty cheap and they're also short, so they're not huge commitments either. Number 29, Resident Evil 4, the classic one from 2005, not the new one. So for this I'm also going to pull up my Steam review, which says it's RE4, what do you expect me to write? This game has been talked to death so many times by so many different people throughout so many years that there's just no way for me to add anything new to this conversation. So I'm just going to focus on what everyone else honestly focuses on as well, because it is the strongest part of the whole experience and what makes the whole thing so enjoyable from start to finish: the pacing. This game should honestly be shown in classes as an example of how to do pacing. This game just doesn't fucking stop. It just keeps escalating and introducing things at just the right moments throughout its whole 12-hour runtime that it feels like 3 hours. Like, the village is just the beginning, and then you fucking find more weapons and get more upgrades until the next batshit insane area begins and the next batshit insane set piece commences over and over and over for the whole duration of of the game, just keeping you at the edge of your seat, just keeping you engaged until you don't even realize that you made it to the end of the game already. It is fucking fantastic, man. At least the base game. I honestly did not care too much for Separate Ways. I did not have that much fun with Ada's playthrough, but Leon's like base game playthrough was just an endless fucking roller coaster of fun. I had so much fun with this game. The one point at which I felt frustrated, I remember, was the end of the minecart section. For some reason, the quick time event there felt much more brutal than any other point in the game, because it was really easy to fail. Not only did you have to be really tight with the timing of the jump, but to get yourself over the ledge, you also had to mash like super fucking hard compared to any other mashing I felt. And the worst part is every time you failed that section, it would put you at the very beginning of the whole minecart section. So yeah, that bit was a bit frustrating, I felt. Other than that, there is also this one boss battle against these two chainsaw ladies, which gives you like a really tight space to navigate compared to the village part at the beginning. And you have two chainsaw enemies this time that are even faster, I think, and like there's still other enemies as well. So that part felt a little too brutal for how the game controls, you know, because as you may know, this game uses like old tank controls, which was kind of difficult to get used to at the beginning, but then it didn't bother me at all once I got used to it, and the whole game felt appropriately designed for how Leon controls, you know. Besides that one section with the two chainsaw ladies, again, that section felt like it was really designed for a character that can turn instantly and like move much more quickly than how Leon moves in this game, you know. So yeah, I kind of struggled with that section and felt that it was a little unfair compared to other sections that I struggled with, but that's about it. Like, other than these two little sections that kind of felt frustrating and unfair to me, the whole game was fucking perfect, and I heavily recommend that you play it. Number 30, Need for Speed Heat. So I've heard nothing but good things about this game from Need for Speed fans, and I gotta say, they must have it rough over there, man. This game is like the opposite of RE4, basically, which makes it funny that it is the game I talk about right after RE4. I played this game for like 10 hours and it felt like 50 hours instead, and I felt that I was making no progress. I get it, I'm not too familiar with the series, and seeing as how hard the cops were chasing me, even at like heat level 2 and stuff, I didn't really play that much of a high risk, high reward playstyle. I didn't spend too much time with night races. I tried to get a few quick races in at night, like complete a few little objectives nearby as quickly as I could and dodge any cops on my way back to the garage to switch back to daytime, because I knew that I would most likely be caught and lose all my money. Like, if I didn't do that and went for more, it would probably end up with me losing everything each night. So I tried to progress a bit more slowly but surely, and rather than that, it felt like I was just not making any progress at all, because every day the races would be replaced with slightly more difficult versions of themselves. Like, the cars would be slightly more powerful each time, and so you would need a slightly more powerful car or slightly better modifications each day too. And the pace at which you were like unlocking cars and upgrades and stuff, the pace at which you like collected money in this way, I felt like I was racing the same races over and over. It's just never really gave this feeling of, hey, I'm getting a better car now. My car is faster now. I have better modifications now. It never really succeeded in making me feel that, you know. I never really felt like I was progressing, and the open world, besides these races, was just insult to injury, because it is just the most bland and boring world to explore with just fuck all to do. It's really one of those things that you can feel was put in there because some some executive was like, hey, players love open worlds, put one in this, put fucking collectibles and shit in it. People love those, yeah, fucking extended the playtime artificially to fucking 50 hours with meaningless garbage. On top of all of this, the game is just not very well optimized. Granted, I have a 4-year-old laptop with an RTX 2060, but I would like at least expect to be able to get a constant frame rate of 60 or above without having to play at the literal lowest settings, which is an eyesore. I only managed to get a consistent frame rate of above 60 when I put everything to low. And even in this state, my laptop was like this close to fucking exploding, I feel. I finally figured out what the heat in Need for Speed Heat truly stands for. With all of that being said, I guess the one positive thing I could say about this game, and even this is a backhanded compliment, the story is in so bad it's good territory, I feel. At least when the cops are on screen. Like, main characters and their buddies, they don't really do much. I don't really feel that they're very interesting characters or anything. I wasn't really invested in any of them. I wasn't invested in any character or anything in the story, honestly, but whenever the cops showed up, I was fucking having a blast. Like, I know that cops aren't all fucking good, like paragons of justice in the real world. I am very aware of like police brutality and how fucking corrupt cops can be, you know. I'm aware of all that terrible shit. But it's not that the cops are evil in this game. It's that they fucking act like mustache twirling Bond villains. The lengths that they went to make the illegal fucking street car racers relatively more sympathetic. It's really funny. That is the one thing about the game that entertained me. Other than that, it's fucking boring. I don't know what else to say. It's just plain boring. And I cannot really recommend it to anyone in good faith. I'm sorry. Number 31. Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes. I finished the game and I have no fucking idea what happened. And I'm not just talking about the story. Like, the story is a fucking given. This is, besides Rising, my first Metal Gear game, and I understood absolutely nothing. But I also felt like I couldn't just understand how to play it exactly during my whole 3 hours playing it. Like, I understood I could go guns blazing or stealth, and that stealth is the intended way, but I remember not being able to figure out how to be effectively stealthy, you know? It's probably because the game was so short and I was like kinda semi-distracted as well while playing it, because I was like chatting with my friends in Discord during the whole time. I remember just the stealth of this game in general feeling much different than any other game I played, like Uncharted or Dishonored or Deus Ex, that had stealth elements in them and you could go stealthy. But I don't remember exactly why. Again, it's a really short game. It's been a while since I played it and I was like semi-distracted. This is an instance where I need to play the game more to really understand it and be able to explain how it works and why it grabbed me or didn't grab me. It's one of those instances where I don't feel that I'm ready to review the game in any way. Because it's a game I played in this endeavor, I still wanted to mention it, but I need to get to Phantom Pain and play that whole game before I can understand what exactly is happening in both the story and the gameplay sections. Because both of them were effectively like a fever dream to me in Ground Zeroes. Number 32. Halo Combat Evolved. This is another game I've already made a full video on, so go watch that, first of all. But also for the people who've already watched that video but haven't kept up with the updates I've given after it, or have just a terrible skill in reading the room, especially after that Boneless Wingman Part 2 talk, it should be obvious that the rest of the Halo videos aren't going to come out. I had originally planned to make reviews of each game and release them throughout the summer of last year, but then just doing the Combat Evolved video kind of drained me already, and I was already out of my very brief Halo craze at that point, so I just moved on to other things, and I don't think I'm going to ever come back to make any individual reviews on any of these games, because like I'm going to go over all the important points anyway in this video for all the remaining Halo games that I played, so there isn't really going to be much of a point for the rest of the reviews after this anyway. Number 33, Halo 2. This game is a massive improvement over Combat Evolved in every way, and it was definitely my favorite in the Master Chief Collection, period. I love the new guns, they are all excellent additions. I love the beam rifle, the energy sword, and I especially fucking love the Covenant carbine. I enjoyed the missions more, I enjoyed the new brutes. The one thing that I found to be poorly designed were the boss fights, which probably gave the same impression to the majority of the player base as well, because there are no more Halo games after this one with any boss fights. Which I'm fine with, because I honestly don't think they really need any. There weren't any boss fights in Combat Evolved either, and even though I have my many issues with that game, as you might be familiar with if you watched the review for it, the game's lack of boss fight was not one of them at all. What was one of them were the downgrades to the game's quality with some of the changes in the Anniversary Edition, which is a problem that thankfully doesn't repeat itself here. The Anniversary Edition of 2 is actually fantastic, with the new high fidelity pre-rendered cutscenes that serve the story being told extremely well, because this story is fucking amazing, let me tell you. I wasn't expecting the thing I was going to be most impressed with this game to be the story. I love the new villains. I love how every character introduced in the first game is utilized here, from Chief and Cortana to Sergeant Johnson, and I also love all the newly introduced characters, especially the Arbiter. I fucking love the Arbiter so much. He is like my favorite overall thing about this series, period. I could gush about how much I love the Arbiter for hours. Even if everything else I've told about the game wasn't already this peak, I would still recommend it solely for the Arbiter, which is why his relatively more passive role in the next game kind of upset me a little. Number 34, Halo 3. This is a lot of people's favorite Halo, and I can see why. It has the best gameplay with new deployable special equipment next to your already vast weapon arsenal from the second game, and it has exhilarating large-scale battles where you take on multiple scarabs at once at some points even. The difficulty is also at a reasonable level once again. It's no secret that Halo 2's difficulty is kind of infamous. I personally played it on Heroic like I did with every other game, and with how much I struggled even at that difficulty level, I definitely am willing to believe everything I've heard about this game's insane legendary difficulty. And after that, I gotta say, Halo 3 I think strikes the perfect balance in difficulty. I was kind of worried that they would tone down the difficulty a little too much after the outrage that 2 created, based on what I've heard, but 3's difficulty I'd say is on point actually. That being said, why it's personally not my favorite is because of how much it relies on Halo 2, since the two make up one story, but Halo 3 is just the third act. It's like those back-to-back movie releases such as Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3. You can jump into Halo 2 without knowing anything about Halo Combat Evolved and still like understand everything and quickly pick up how the game is played. If you're jumping into Halo 3, you'll still pick up the game, yes, but you won't really understand what's going on without playing 2. I can't really picture anyone getting into the series from this point and not wondering who the hell the Arbiter is, what the hell is Gravemind, why is Cortana trapped down there with the Flood, what is the Flood, like what is going on. And even with 2's context, I feel that the narrative in this game doesn't have nearly as much focus and makes some bad decisions as well, which overall makes the story a lot inferior inferior to 2, and the gameplay upgrades really doesn't end up remedying that downgrade for me, especially with how the Arbiter is used in this game. Like I said, he was my favorite part of 2, and I was so hyped to see him and Chief work together in the third game, but they don't even like banter. Chief says like one word to the Arbiter in the whole game, and like it just ended up really disappointing me, is what I'm trying to say. It is a good game, but I feel it is a disappointing conclusion to Halo 2's compelling story. Number 35, Halo 3 ODST. This is the most interesting Halo game by far. Unlike the other Halo games, this game doesn't feature a linear string of missions. It rather has an open map with the freedom to do the story missions in any order you want. And the open map doesn't really have much going on. It has like some audio logs and occasional like enemy patrols that you can engage with. But really this game shouldn't work with such an empty map on paper, but it does, because this game has actually big vibes and big atmosphere. It really makes you feel like a sci-fi noir detective piecing together this mystery of what happened to your friends, investigating the signs of where they had last been and figuring out what happened that led them there. And in the meantime, you're crossing these empty, cold industrial streets in the middle of the night with your like scanner on to see the objects of interest, which drowns everything in this peace filter that is like from something like Deus Ex Human Revolution, and combined with this chill noir jazz music in the background with saxophones and shit. It is such a vibe in a Halo game. I am so baffled. I was not expecting this at all from any Halo game, and I'm sure that this might make the game boring to some people after all the high-octane large-scale battles in the previous games, because even in the more action-packed story missions of this game, it never really reaches those levels of hype. But I think it works for the context of the game, because you're playing as the ODSTs in this one, not an elite Covenant soldier or a Spartan. You are not nearly at their level at all, and it makes it so that these battles, where instead of taking on multiple scarabs at once by yourself, you're struggling to bring down just one tank with your whole squad, works well actually. Like, this is not a game that should contextually be escalating things after 3, and even with its smaller scale, it ends up being just as intense, to the point that the situation is actually really desperate from a story standpoint at the end. Which brings us to the one gripe I have with this game, which is that the tone feels off, with the characters acting so upbeat and quirky in this one within the context of the imminent crisis that they're in. Like, especially at the ending, while they're still cracking jokes and making lighthearted remarks while the city is about to get fucking destroyed, really ends up taking a lot away from an experience that is otherwise really fucking fantastic, I'd say. I think this was also done because they wanted to highlight the contrast between these ODSTs and the stoic, like war machine like Spartans that are always fucking serious, but they just go way too overboard with this like joke cracking lighthearted characters. I think in such a dire situation, I think they were ought to be written a bit more serious, at least in a crisis like this, you know. Number 36, Halo Reach. So a bit of a funny thing that I didn't mention before was that when I was considering making a separate review video for all of these games, I already had an earlier script before that point actually, where I was planning to do a single video that covered each of the 6 campaigns at once that are in the Master Chief Collection, and I'm actually going to go over a small part of that script script that was about Halo Reach to basically summarize what my feelings on that game is. Halo Reach is a game that I don't have as much to passionately rave or rant about as the other games, and that's a good thing considering the length of this script already, but not such a good thing considering how hard this game seems to be trying. This is of course the last game made by Bungie, and I can really see how much of their heart and soul was put into this one. It definitely feels like the culmination of everything they have learned from their successes and their mistakes. I have literally nothing negative to say about this game, but I would still rank it below 2, 3 and ODST. And the reason behind that is while this game suffers from far fewer problems than those games did, it also doesn't ever reach the heights that those games reached with any of its elements. Everything here from story and gameplay to soundtrack, level design and atmosphere feels like a very solid 8 out of 10. There are no weak links in my opinion and everything complements each other very well, but nothing goes above and beyond. I like everything that's here, but I don't love any of it. Halo 2 has my favorite story and character, Halo 3 has my favorite gameplay and levels, ODST has my favorite soundtrack and vibes, Halo Reach has my favorite nothing, unfortunately. It is not a case of the game being weak at all, but a case of everything that came before it being so strong in one aspect or the other. So much so that I can accept their problems that Reach doesn't have. Reach, for those of you that don't know, is a very important planet in Halo's lore. Its invasion by the Covenant is commonly referred to as one of the most tragic and horrifying events in this war as a whole. And since it takes place during this legendary event that the player has been hearing about over and over in the previous games, finally letting them see for themselves just what this whole Reach thing was about, the weight on this game's shoulders are immense to say the least. Before moving on to this next section, I must really warn you about major spoilers that I'm going to get into. If you don't want to be spoiled on Halo Reach, skip to this timestamp that's on the screen right now. If you're still here, let me continue by saying that to fulfill its goal, Reach kills off almost its entire cast one by one throughout the game, which sounds like tear-jerking misery porn and should be more than enough to amplify the bleak tone of the game, but it's just kind of sad instead. Now, this is not because the game doesn't do its death scenes or its characters justice. In fact, how they are portrayed is completely fitting for this game and makes total sense. We are playing as a Spartan again, but as part of a whole team of Spartans this time. And Spartans, of course, are the best of the best. They are trained to be super soldiers that keep their cool and don't let fear, personal attachment, or anything of the sort get in the way of their mission. I mean, that's the whole reason why Master Chief is so beloved. He fits in the classic archetype of the stoic warrior that at first glance seems like they barely have any emotion or character depth, but they are acting this way solely because they have to possess the strength to fulfill their mission no matter what happens to them. They have to possess the kind of focus and resolve that no one should have to, so that no one else has to. It is a very simple and common archetype, but one that is so effective and easy to get attached to. It is no surprise that we are so often absolutely enchanted by characters of this nature, and the main characters of this game are written in a way that it feels like they're almost there, and they all do end up getting there by the end of their journey. We see throughout the game we spend with them that even though they are not quite as laser focused as Chief is, sometimes breaking into arguments in between each other, letting their guard down or their emotions take hold, they are for the most part much more calm, calculating and capable than the ODSTs we have seen in the previous game, which tells us that they're more than qualified for their role as Spartans. And each of their deaths solidifies the legitimacy of these qualifications as they each fearlessly face their demise without hesitation so that humanity can fight another day. It does make sense for these death scenes to be depicted as they are. None of them feature any of our characters breaking into tears or arguing back and forth on how there must be another way or which one of them should sacrifice themselves, because that's not what Spartans do. Everything is decided and acted upon quickly by them, which includes self-sacrifice and mourning. It may not be much of a tearjerker, but it is still powerful each time. So then what's the problem, you may ask? And there really isn't one, to be honest. Like I said, there isn't really anything wrong with the game, but everything just lacks that extra punch that would lift them up from great to masterpiece. And for the character deaths, I think that has to do more with how many there are and what comes before them rather than how the game handles them when they happen. As well written as they are, we have 6 main characters here for one game with 10 missions, and that's not even mentioning brand new prominent side characters like Halsey. As a result of this, none of the characters end up getting as much screen time or get explored to a sufficient degree to grow on you as the Arbiter, Chief Cortana, and even side characters like Sergeant Johnson did in the past. And once the game starts killing them one one by one, it is effective at first, but you kind of get numb to it after a while. Especially since we know the historical significance of the fall of Reach beforehand, so it's easy for us to guess after the first couple of deaths that the game is just going to keep the ball rolling, that this is what it is going for. It works that these characters fall like dominoes for the effectiveness of the overall narrative, highlighting how brutal this fight on Reach was, as even the Spartans could not endure the Covenant's unrelenting assault. But the game puts so many eggs in the basket of killing off main characters to achieve this that it kind of diminishes the effect of each individual death. So that's the end of the part that I was going to read of the script, and that pretty much summarizes my feelings on Reach. Now on to the last of the Halo sequels that I have played. Number 37, Halo 4. So everyone knows that this is the first game by 343 Productions rather than Bungie, and that is already enough reason for it to be controversial. So as you would expect, it is a divisive game that has its fans and its haters. Personally, I'm overall more of a fan than a hater. To go over the story first, I like it overall. I think everything to do with the Didact and the Forerunners were trash, but the deeply personal and relationship focused parts between Chief and Cortana were pretty nice for the most part, even though some parts could have been written a bit better. It's still overall a really sweet dynamic to two have, and a really great arc for the both of them, especially how it all leads up to that great ending. Honestly, I really like the game's ending with Cortana and Chief. But besides that, I also like how everyone, not just Cortana, is pushing Chief to be more human in this story. The soldiers aren't machine speech at the end specifically. I think what the story is trying to do is really commendable in this regard. It really gives a strong and important message, I feel. That is enough for me to overlook its bad parts with the Didact and the Forerunners, all that garbage, you know. To move on to the gameplay, I get the criticisms, but I personally enjoyed the Forerunner weapons, even though they weren't really that different in functionality from the other two classes of weapons. I get that people think it's not really too necessary to introduce a third class of weapons and not be it too different from the other two still. Like, we really don't need 3 different assault rifles, you know? Like, I get that, but I still honestly found it fun. I don't know. I think maybe I just have basic bitch taste and I'm really lame, but I liked how the weapons looked and I like how they felt to use. Absurdly futuristic, like, sci-fi bullshit that they pull off, you know? The Forerunner enemies as well felt kind of like this. Again, maybe I have really basic bitch tastes and am lame, but I found them to be cool, you know? I found it to be cool that they were like zipping around, teleporting, doing all their crazy like advanced alien bullshit, summoning energy shields and stuff out of nowhere. I don't know, I think the game was fun for the most part for making these additions. And to go over the ammo scarcity debate, I've heard a lot of people complain about this. Me personally, I didn't feel it to be too unreasonable. Yes, it was more scarce than the previous games, but I found it to be mostly just enough during combat, you know, the ammo that is scattered around. It didn't really like make me run out of ammo completely and like run around like a crazy person trying to fucking melee the rest of the enemies, like, because I had no ammo left. It just made me have to like run back for ammo, like run around looking for ammo much more, which was okay. Like, I didn't really get annoyed by that. I didn't really think it added too much to the game either, but I don't know, it just didn't really affect the game that much, either negatively or positively. I feel it was just, I guess, their way of incentivizing using different weapons, you know, instead of just sticking to a Covenant carbine that you find at the beginning of the level and just keep using that until the end. Number 38, Stardew Valley. So the most interesting interesting thing about this game to me is that people call this a farming sim, but that's just a part of what's here actually. It's just the most front and center aspect of the game. It's more of a village life sim, I'd say, because you don't really like end up working on your farm for the whole playtime. Usually a day you spend in this game consists of, if you have not already automated that process, just watering your plants in the morning, and then you could spend your day doing anything. If you have animals, you will collect their eggs and stuff, and if you are growing mushrooms or something like that in the cave next to your house, you will collect those, and then for most of the day your character will be free to do whatever, not just, you know, confined to the farm. So you can go out and explore, you can mine, you can do some wood cutting, you can talk to the NPCs, go fish. There are events and stuff that occur certain days. There are relationships to advance with characters. You can give them gifts and stuff. You can complete side quests for a little bit of extra money, and you can also play some mini games. So really there are a lot of things to do, and each of them helps you make progress in a certain area. For instance, mining makes you find some rare ores from time to time, which you can fill up the museum with, and you collect rewards from that. Fishing from different bodies of water allows you to find different types of fish, which you can then use to cook different types of food, and you can also farm different types of crops each season. And returning these collections of different items to the community center helps you renovate it. There's also your own house and farm buildings that you can constantly renovate and make bigger, and many more things to do that I'm not going to count one by one. You get the gist. There's a lot to do in this game, which is what makes it so fun, I believe, than it would otherwise be if it was just a farming sim and nothing else. The one aspect of the game that I don't think is as strong as the others are the NPCs, which is interesting because the NPCs seem to be what most people are obsessed with the most, and I just don't really get it because these are like some of the most NPC-ass NPCs I've ever seen. And I'm not saying that as like a jab at the developer. Like, this is a single developer game, at least the last time I checked it was, and it is already so impressive in the first place to be able to put this many NPCs in the game with each their own life cycles and stuff, you know, with their own lines and possible events. It's just that whenever things are not progressing with their storylines, they just kind of keep doing the same things and saying the same things, which is typical NPC behavior. Like I said, I'm not expecting it to be any more than that. I'm not really saying this as a negative of the game. It's just that I don't understand what people are so crazy about, because like this is as standard as NPCs get. Like, people that are crazy about the NPCs in this game, I wonder if they have not played any other game with NPCs in their life, because like this is pretty, you know, by the book stuff. And like, I get that they like the characters, not the fucking technical fidelity of these NPCs. Like, I'm focusing on the wrong thing, I get that, but I was just trying to say that because they feel so much like NPCs, I can't really look at them as characters. Usually when I get crazy about a character, everything they do in a piece of media is scripted, not like, you know, this programmed life cycle behavior. I don't know how to like best put it into words, but the fact that they are so obviously fucking video game NPCs, you know what I mean, is kind of like preventing me from appreciating them as characters, if that makes any sense. Like, I can't really get as crazy about them as everyone else can. I even like married to one of them to see what would change if like maybe how I interact with that character would get more involved than how I interact with the rest of the villagers, and not much really changed at all. They just prepared me coffee in the morning and then like worked on their stuff in the backyard. I don't know. I think there's just a lot of room to make the interactions with the NPCs a lot more interesting, and I really hope that the future updates focus more on that than other things. And it is also worth noting that I haven't actually played the game since last year, so I don't know what got added in the latest like big update. So maybe this part of the game has gotten significantly better since I have played. I have no idea. And it is also worth reiterating that again, this is just the area of the game that I see the most potential in for further improvement. It's not like an objective flaw of the game or anything like that. And it's not something that I am bashing the developer for. Again, the game is already so goddamn impressive, and it's one of the best purchases I've ever made because I got it for dirt cheap and I played like 70 hours of it. It has amazing value. It has like better value than any other game I can think of that I have played. And I have not even touched co-op or got close to even beating the game. And if you ask why I haven't beaten it, well, first of all, the burnout of playing the same game for 70 hours without putting anything in between is an obvious one. But I would say that the catch of this game, the catch of this huge game with tons of stuff to do for hours, is that the moment your progression in any of the areas I've talked about halts or slows down and you have to like kind of get the grind going, like you have to kind of accumulate some money before you can keep progressing. If you have to like wait the next season for different crops or something like that, or like wait for your animals to grow, wait for something to be built, something like that, like occasionally it becomes a waiting game before you can like more actively progress. And in those times the game becomes really boring really quickly. Like the moment your days become okay, let me just harvest this, sell some of my harvested shit, collect eggs, sell those, maybe forage some shit, sell those, and wait for this building to be built. Like the moment you are not exploring new things, new areas of the game, the fun quickly diminishes. Overall though, it is a really cozy experience that is also huge and a fantastic purchase that I recommend everyone makes, because I don't really even care if you're interested in a game like this or not. It is practically fucking free, so just buy it. Number 39, West of Loathing. If you have ever heard about this title at all, you probably know that this is a comedy game, which is a really risky genre, I feel, but somehow this game passes the test with flying colors. It actually has a great sense of humor, I think. It won't have you rolling on the floor or anything, but it will consistently make you chuckle, and the jokes are pretty smart and none of them feel stale or cheap, you know. It feels thought out, and it's not just the comedy that feels thought out. Surprisingly, how the game actually plays also has a very smart design, and it is very intuitive. With all the various stats, equipment and consumables, along with options like speeding up the encounter so you don't have to constantly wait for animations and stuff. Like if you just looked at the game from a distance, you would definitely not expect it to play it this well, I'd say. The soundtrack is also a banger and fits perfectly whether you're in battle or just exploring a new area. However, with all of that being said, this ended up being another game that I didn't finish for the exact same reasons as Stardew Valley. Once you kind of end up being stuck somewhere, like either you don't know where to go next or whom to talk to or how to progress through a puzzle, it's just not really fun to search for what to do next, you know what I mean? Like the game constantly has to keep going to keep you entertained, because otherwise when the pacing slows down, it just gets old very quickly. The battles get repetitive, the jokes feel a bit repetitive because you keep talking to the same NPCs after doing something to see if something will trigger and their dialogue will change and you will be able to progress again or something like that. And I guess I could have looked up guides, but the game isn't really that linear. So it could have been difficult to figure out what I have exactly done and what I haven't done yet from a comprehensive guide. And plus, I wasn't really curious about what the rest of the game was going to be after a certain point. As much as it pains me to say this I feel is one of those games that overstays its welcome. It is really fun. All the things that I've talked about and praised this game for are really fun for a few hours before it gets kind of predictable and you're just looking for it to be over already. I gave it like 10 hours before it lost its grip on me and I haven't returned. I think I was close to the ending with this one though, unlike Stardew Valley, which probably had like 70 hours more content or something like that, I don't know. Number 40, Terraria. Terraria is also another game that I didn't see to completion, but for the duration that I played it, I had a lot of fun. This time, I'm going to be honest, the reasons that I've quit the game are more subjective. It's not like any flaw with the game. It's not like the Stardew Valley or West of Loathing situation where the game just, loses its grip on you and becomes boring or anything like that. No. It's really a meeting, but I want to explain what it is. So I just want to go in and fight the bosses. I don't really like the idea, first of all, of building an arena to fight the boss. I did it for Wall of Flesh and it didn't bother me that much, but like after that I was apparently supposed to build a similar arena but with multiple levels this time for Skeletron Prime, and I was it Skeletron Prime? I think it was Skeletron Prime. I was just trying to take him on and I basically got the best gear I possibly could, I think, before I took on that boss, and I just couldn't beat him, and apparently the right way to fight him was to build that arena, and I knew that more bosses after him was going to require the same as well, and I just don't like that very much. Again, it's not like I'm bashing the game for that, it's a meeting. It's not the game, it's me, but it's just something that pushes me away from the game. But that wasn't the bigger issue. The other thing that made me stop having fun with the game was when I entered hard mode and the game suddenly became not so chill, and I was expecting it to not be so chill anymore, but I was expecting, the enemies that I fight outside of my base when I was exploring and stuff, to be not chill, and I was okay with that. But after I entered hard mode, the game began summoning giant mechanical worms and shit on top of my base if I took my time figuring out what to do next. It's sent pirate raids and stuff to my base, which lasted for fucking 15-20 minutes before I could drive them all away, in the process of which I kept dying over and over because there were just so many of them. I'm fine with the game being challenging and the dying a lot, I'm fine with that, but I just want to be able to be safe inside my own little base. It's not even that big. I'm not I don't own half the fucking map. It's a small base around my fucking spawn point, and I want to be able to be safe in that. I don't want it to be constantly sieged and fucking raided, and I just couldn't chill. Once I entered hard mode, I just couldn't chill in there and took my time, experimenting with crafting, decorations, that sort of stuff, rebuilding my home, because the game just kept fucking spawning mechanical worms and pirate ships there, and I just don't like that. I don't know what else to say. For instance, Minecraft is a game that is compared to Terraria constantly, which is fucking stupid because they're nothing alike. And I will criticize Minecraft for a lot of things. I'm not going to get into them here, but generally I think it is a game that I prefer over Terraria, but even so, it has more objective flaws than Terraria, I think. But one thing that I prefer in that game to Terraria is you have raids, you have these events where you are sieged by waves and waves of enemies, but they don't happen in your own base and you still trigger them yourself. You don't fucking get raided in your own base if you just don't do anything for 3 days straight. You are free to not do anything for 3 days straight without being fucking harassed by endgame bosses and shit inside your own base. So yeah, that's why I was driven away from the game, basically. But other than that, it was a fun time, and it's a really cheap purchase once again. That is really a fucking great game, honestly, except for these two things that frustrated me. So yeah, moving on. Number 41, Signalis. This is another game that I made a full review on, and I think it is one of my best videos, and it is also my most viewed review. So if that intrigues you at all, go watch that video to find out what I think about the game. Once again, it is linked in the description. Moving on to the next game. Number 42, Solar Ash. This is a game that is clearly inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, and it is made by the developers of Hyper Light Drifter. So if those things sound interesting to you, I recommend that you definitely give it a shot. But do keep in mind that even though I said it's inspired by Shadow of the Colossus clearly, it still plays very differently than that. It's not so much slow climbing as it is fast surfing, and you will immediately see what I mean if you quickly search on like YouTube for the first boss of the game and watch that fight, in order to not give huge spoilers to yourself but still get what the game is about in a general sense. I think the first boss is a very good way to gauge whether you will like the game or not. I've also made a YouTube community post on this game shortly reviewing it about like 4 months ago, so let me just go over that once more before we move on to the next game. Solar Ash is a nice little game to sit back and relax with while listening to a podcast or chatting with a friend on an off day or weekend. It's mostly chill and atmospheric with short sections of adrenaline, especially during the boss fights. They're always really satisfying to complete and give you a big dopamine rush. There's some occasional jank here and there, but the overall experience is mostly polished and endearing with a heartfelt message at the end. Do consider giving it a shot if you're looking for something short and sweet to kill time with. 100%ing it in game, not achievements, took me about like 9 hours in total. It's really not a huge commitment, though I'd say the price seems a bit high to me for a game of this little length and depth, so I recommend you pick it up on sale. Number 43, Outer Wilds. This is the last game on this list that I have an individual video on, and you should definitely go check that out. I think it is my best review, the one I'm most proud of, and once again it will be linked in the description. Moving on to the next game. Number 44, Dead Cells. So this is probably a consequence of me playing The Binding of Isaac as my first roguelike and spending like 500 hours on it before I moved on to this backlog, but playing that game I think has really crippled my ability to enjoy simpler roguelikes that doesn't let you go as crazy as you can in that game. People who played Isaac and its expansions, especially that came later on like Afterbirth and Repentance, will know that there are so many borderline infinite possibilities in that game for your builds. Basically, you could spend 1,000 hours on that game and still achieve a brand new item combination that you haven't seen before that will just change your attacks in such a weird way. And throughout the course of a single run in that game, because there are so many floors and you find so many items, all these combinations like stack on top of each other as well, and you can really get to a literal godlike status at the end of each run that will even let you melt the endgame boss in quite literally under a second. And the game also lets you break it, like it doesn't have the safeguards to keep you from like infinitely duplicating items and stuff, and that sounds like an oversight, but if you play the game or are knowledgeable about it, you will know that it is quite intentional. And the only other game I've seen that comes as close to that is Risk of Rain 2, where you will have such insane runs that the deciding factor of for how much longer could you go on will not be when you get defeated, but when your computer gets defeated, you know, because it is struggling so goddamn much to keep everything going, to keep up with the insane shit in the game. And every other roguelike I played feels way too tame. Like the definition between a broken build in, say, BPM bullets per minute, for instance, and a broken build in The Binding of Isaac are so fucking different. They are like mountains apart from each other. It is not even a close comparison. And for smaller, shorter roguelikes like BPM, this isn't really an issue, but for something like Dead Cells, where you have hundreds of hours ahead of you probably to unlock everything in the game, you really need to do more to make every run feel different, or make the player feel that there is potential here for a very special run. They need to feel that, okay, if I get lucky enough, or if I play my cards right, I could get a crazy build like this, where I combine these two items in the next run, which would play so differently than any previous run I've had so far, or let me achieve such a different power level than any other run before, you know. But as it is, the game just doesn't have enough variety or enough potential for that. Like, there aren't really enough different items. Like, there are a lot of items, but a lot of them feel very similar to use. For instance, like every bow, every sword, they don't really feel different enough. Whereas something like Tiny Planet in Isaac, for instance, or the Ludovico technique, like, completely changes how you play the rest of the run, you know. And again, those two items also combine in that game, instead of like you having to swap between them, which is really what makes you motivated to spend hundreds and hundreds of hours with a game like that without getting bored, you know. Dead Cells, as fun as it is, does not have that with its single playable character, number of areas, and its number of items, or rather its variety of items, and the way you use those items, you know, the way you have to swap between them rather than combine them, like in, again, Risk of Rain 2 or Isaac. That is at least if you don't have the paid DLC packs. I haven't gotten any of the paid DLC packs, so I can't attest for that, but I'm sure that even though the game would remain fun for a longer period of time, without changing how it works essentially, I don't see it keeping me hooked until I would come even close to 100%ing it, let alone like 50%ing it, you know. There's still a lot that I haven't seen in the game, from various challenges and harder modes to a lot of items, and I just don't have the incentive to keep playing to see more. Like, I am already bored of this game. But what I just described in length isn't the only reason for it either. I have another major problem with this game, which is its final boss fight. Now, it's not unbeatable or insanely hard or anything, like I have beaten it multiple times, but I just find not the difficulty spike, but the level of this enemy's resistance to status effects compared to every single other enemy in the game previously to be frustrating. Like, forget about the common or even elite enemies. The previous boss before this one is so susceptible to status effects like freeze and stun in comparison that it is just baffling how they thought this was a good idea. Because what this does is potentially negate the strategy you've been using to get to the final boss up to this point. Like, say you have a freezing attack or a stun that you've been using against enemies up to this point, and chances are every single time you just had to land one hit with either status effect to immobilize your enemy, whether it was a boss, a common enemy, or an elite enemy. And right at the last room of the run, you cannot rely on that tactic anymore and have to swap to a different strategy, which is just a scummy thing for the game to do when you're as close to victory as you could possibly be. Like, I would have no problems at all with this and even think of it as a positive thing if the game enforced this swap to a different strategy from an earlier point. Like, if you could clearly see a gradual decrease in the effectiveness of things like your freeze grenades and stun grenades, which would signal you the fact that, okay, I'm not going to only have to become more powerful to progress through the later levels, but I'm going to also have to ditch these OP items that are effectively get out of jail for free cards against even the most powerful enemies right now. It's clear that I'm not going to be able to rely on these items at the later stages of the game. But no, it's not like that in the actual game. In fact, there is not a single sign that you're not going to be able to rely on any of these items at any point in the later stages of the game, because from start to finish, with the exception of the very last boss, every single thing that you face is as equally susceptible to every single status effect. Like, I understand that you want your final boss to be hard. I appreciate hard bosses, like I said, but making it so much more resistant to everything you throw out compared to everything else in the game is not the way to do it. You have to make that switch gradual, or just not make your crowd control ability so powerful at the first place. Overall, fun game for a few dozen hours, but it clearly wants to keep you hooked for longer, and it's just not designed for that at a fundamental level, even without the frustrating final boss design. Number 45, Furi Demake. I mean, there's not much to dissect here. It's just a 30-minute like demake of the first battle in Furi against the Chain. Furi is already a pretty simple game in the best way possible, and this one has even simpler controls and mechanics. The fight itself is also the same way, with less phases than the original, which is all fine because it serves better this way to the purposes of a demake anyway, and the game is free too, so there really isn't much reason here to ask for anything more. It's just a fun little experiment on the original fight. But that being said, the one thing that kind of disappointed me was the music. It just sounds like some generic arcade beat 'em up theme, I guess, so that it adds more to the overall arcade vibe, but with all other elements still carrying a visible Furi DNA even through the demake filter. I just think it would have been better to use some 8-bit or 16-bit cover of the Chain's theme from the original game for this fight, but other than that, it was a pretty fun 15 minutes. Number 46, Pyre. So before I say anything about this game, I'm going to first of all say that if someone asked me to describe this game with one sentence, I would say it's Space Jam meets Angel Beats. So if that sounds interesting, you should definitely check it out before listening to the rest of what I'm going to say. And the rest of what I'm going to say is me reading a YouTube post that I wrote for this game as a review, just like with Solar Ash. So without further ado, let's quickly move on to that because it is longer this time and this video is already so goddamn long, Jesus Christ. Pyre was the only game in the Supergiant Games catalog that I hadn't touched yet. Since this is their least popular game, I approached it cautiously, keeping my expectations from reaching too high. To absolutely no one's surprise, turns out there was no need for that. This game also has all the excellent capabilities that every other game made by Supergiant shares. A great cast of characters, stellar art direction, amazing voice acting, gripping lore and plot, and of course an absolute banger of a soundtrack. In fact, about that last one, I might even say that this is my favorite OST in any of their games yet. There are some individual tracks in their other games that beat every track in this OST, but as a whole OST, this one edges out the competition for me. The game is also brimming with creativity and ambition. Your journey follows a big band of colorful misfits, each from different factions whose shared history involves wars, betrayals, forbidden love, and much more among them. As such, it never gets old to anticipate how the backgrounds and personalities of the characters will get to play off each other next time, through whichever of the countless number of possible interactions you get to see based on your choices. Speaking of that, it is fascinating how much this game feels like a proto-Hades in that regard. It makes sense that it's the one they released in between Transistor and Hades. The former game felt like Bastion's design perfection, Connected, where the plot focuses on a very small cast of characters while the audiovisual design remains very consistent from start to finish. Hades, on the other hand, expands these elements in all directions with a huge cast, a set of completely different environments, and an ocean of optional interactions to see. Pyre feels like a precursor to this. The point where Supergiant went, okay, let's not follow the same two characters through one city for the whole game next time. We've already done the best we can with that, so let's try something new this time. Let's have 10 characters and make them go through deserts, mountains, forests, the ocean, and much more. Let's have branching paths at every turn to lead each player to a different one of countless possible dialogue trees and ultimately endings. However, unlike Hades, whose roguelike nature allows for this approach to add to the game and make it even more playable than it otherwise would be, Pyre gets a huge asterisk next to its masterpiece status because of it. See, this is a game where the gameplay part is considered to be the rights you participate in, where you play a 3v3 match of fantasy basketball with spells and stage hazards and all kinds of fun things. It's a unique idea, plays as well as any other game made by Supergiant, and is usually hyped with the announcer's commentary, the banger soundtrack, animation spectacles, and the opponent's shit talking. It gets quite involved as the game progresses too, with all the mechanics at your disposal and the additional difficulty modifiers still keeping things interesting as you complete more and more rights. The caveat is that the rights are few and far between all the story sections, which will definitely turn off some players from the game. Bluntly put, this game is mostly a visual novel with occasional brief periods of Supergiant's usual isometric brawler gameplay sprinkled here and there. I played for 14 hours and I felt like maybe 4 of that was spent with the rights. The rights can last as short as a couple minutes with a strong team comp equipped with the right buffs and talismans, and everything in between them, unless you choose to ignore all of it and hold spacebar through all the dialogue to keep skipping it, goes on for so much longer. You complete a ride and the character decides to chat with you, you pick where to go next, another chat ensues, then your cart starts moving and you watch it slowly make its way until it stops to take a break somewhere along the road, another chat ensues, then you read the new pages added to the lore book, then pick how to spend the break, do that thing, have another chat, continue the road, have yet another chat, do some shopping for talismans and upgrades dust, equip and apply them to your team members, meet with the enemy team and banter with them, listen to the announcer hype up the match, pick your team comp, banter with the other team one last time, and then finally play another ride. Now, this did not bother me, as I mentioned that everything you look at, read and listen to in this game is stellar, but it will undoubtedly bore others if the 20% completion rate of the achievement you get by beating the main story is anything to go by. I have a feeling it was this aspect of the game that kind of made the game unpopular amongst the rest of Supergiant's catalog, because it's not really much of a game compared to them. So manage your expectations accordingly. If following a new branching story told by Supergiant decorated with all the usual fantastic visuals and OST sounds enticing to you, then you'll probably enjoy the game. If you however want to play a Supergiant game, you may feel disappointed. Number 47. Hotline Miami. You all know Hotline Miami even if you haven't played it. At the very least, you have seen a couple screenshots of a simplistic top-down view with just one man with a shotgun standing in a hotel lobby or something with 1,000 bloody corpses around him, listened to one of its many hype soundtracks, or seen an eyeless chicken mask worn by a man with a jacket and a baseball bat. This game is for the most part exactly what you'd expect based on these first impressions. A mechanically simple but addictive galore of violence complemented by an 80s vaporwave aesthetic and banger music. It's like what GTA Vice City would look like if the series never ditched the top-down view and got even more violent. But as you play, something deeper and more sinister also begins to rear its ugly head. You hop in for the action and then begin to question what these nightmares that your character keeps seeing mean. Why do you keep seeing the same guy at every counter at every shop? Who are these people that keep calling you to give you your next missions? Why are you doing their bidding? Are you just a psychopath that's fine with killing hundreds of people just for some money, or is there something else that's going on? Why are people around you turning into zombies in between missions? Is your character imagining all of this unhinged shit because their mental state is deteriorating after all the killings they've done, or is something else happening? And beyond all that, how much of what you're seeing is actually happening and real? For me, whenever a story takes a turn to this direction where you're supposed to question how much of what you just saw was real and how much of it was your character's imagination, it kind of drives me away from itself by default, because it has come to a point where I just kind of started seeing it as bait to get easy praise from everyone engaging with your media by emulating what stories like Fight Club and American Psycho do. And since it's no secret that this game is really heavily influenced by the movie Drive with Ryan Gosling, a similar cult classic, it would be a no-brainer to assume that the game doesn't have an identity of its own and has nothing interesting to say, but it definitely becomes apparent that that's very much not the case once all the pieces come together. But even then, it's just a taste of what things are yet to come, because as much as I enjoyed and appreciated this first game, it's really with its sequel that I understood what truly makes this series so legendary. Number 48, Hotline Miami 2. This game has subverted my expectations in the best way possible. If I were to make an individual video for any of the games here that I haven't already done, it would definitely be for Hotline Miami 2. Unfortunately though, at the time I played it, I was still burnt out from the Outer Wilds video, and there's already a video out there by Ovendal that basically says everything about the game that I would wish to say, titled Hotline Miami 2 is a misunderstood masterpiece. Again, as with everything else, the link to that will also be in the description. But besides them, everyone knows this game and not nearly enough people talk about it, I think. It is not only a masterclass in narrative but also meta-narrative storytelling, and it does this not via fourth wall breaks or making in-game references to itself as a piece of media. No, it uses its characters as allegories to real groups of people that engage with it and with the original game, which is so much more interesting and is also not annoying, unlike the former method can usually be. It is a game that has many things to say, from the nature of making a sequel to one of the most beloved indie games at the time and the weight of the expectations that comes with that, to how engaging with fictional violence as an outlet may be a sign of more sinister things than we think. Not only does the meta social commentary feels accurate, but the message of the actual in-game plot and how its events play out from both a story and a gameplay perspective is masterfully communicated. This is a more difficult game than Hotline Miami 1, at times more slow and miserable than fast and fun, because each level also complements whoever you're playing as. And with the game trying to juggle so many characters and themes at once in its incredibly short runtime, you would expect all of this to be half-baked, immature, clumsy, underdeveloped, but on the contrary, it all feels scarily real. Wanted killers that fantasize about being found and made a legend. Those that idolize such legends and don't even hesitate for once to follow in their footsteps when given the power to do so. Those that literally unironically think that genocide against every other race and culture that isn't theirs would lead to a better world. The endless power struggles between vicious gangs that terrorize a whole city of people just trying to live their lives without getting caught in the crossfire. Those that once entered the crime world for whatever reason, not being able to get out. And even more, that all leads up to this catastrophic, bleak ending after all this escalation. That just leaves a hole in your soul after finishing the game and makes you go, holy shit man, I just wanted to play a little action game that was shotgun meets face. I wasn't ready for all this, Jesus Christ. I know there are a lot of people that prefer Hotline 1, but to me that is a fun classic, while 2 is an unrivaled masterpiece. Number 49, Dark Souls. There's a lot I want to say about this game and its community and the culture around it, you know, its influence, but I think I will save all of those for another time, because this video is already so long again, and I still have Dark Souls 3, Sekiro and Elden Ring to play, so I don't think this will be the last time I will be talking about these games, so I will save that talk for later. But to hype hyper-focused on Dark Souls 1 as a game right now. I think the most important thing to know here is that this game is not as git good scrub as everyone says. If any of you follow Noah Caldwell Gervais by any chance, I think his essay on the trilogy really dissects it best about how these games are more dependent on your choices than your skills, really. Because there are a lot of ways to approach each encounter, from a room of enemies to a boss fight. And once you come to understand all the tools at your disposal, it quickly goes from a game that you struggle with to a game that you crushed, even in the same first playthrough. Like, despite the fact that the latter half of the game, you could argue, has way tougher challenges for the player, I had a much easier time with it than I had with the first half of the game. And overall, I could say I enjoyed the game, but definitely not nearly as much as most people out there seem to enjoy it. I think it has its high points, low points, and middle points. The most disappointing aspect for me was definitely the boss roster, especially in the second half of the game, after Ornstein and Smo, which was definitely the peak of the game's bosses, I think. And even the relatively much better first half didn't have any bosses that reached the same levels. They were fine, but it's still a shame because I was kind of expecting better boss fights in general from a game that is so famous for its boss battles. Really, the only one that stood out to me was Ornstein and Smo. Besides them, there were a few bosses that were cool in concept, but I think lacking in execution, like Ceaseless Discharge, for instance, who is a boss that changes its move list based on which part of the arena you fight him, but none of these move lists are particularly exciting, and all of them in fact are very lacking in move variety. Then there's the way important info is communicated in this game, which is cool when it works, but there needs to be a more reliable way also to warn players against dangers and teach them the advanced mechanics without notes and bloodstains. The game isn't guilty of this always, but sometimes I genuinely can't think of a way I was supposed to find something out without the help of previous players, you know? And for people that for any reason might have to play this game offline, that is a huge issue. Then there's the lore of the game, which is a lot of people's favorite part, and it is mine as well. The lore in this game is genuinely fucking excellent, and I think it is the best part of this series as a whole so far. But I wish it was a little easier to decipher for the average person, and you didn't have to go out of your way to read things and pay attention to things that you wouldn't usually, such as item descriptions. And I get that a lot of people like that. I usually like it as well, but even though digging for lore is fun, I kind of wish the game spoon-fed just a little more of it, because I feel it's genuinely kind of a shame that not everyone that plays the game can be aware of how genuinely incredible this shit is, man. Like, I genuinely think that if you turn this trilogy into like a multiple season TV series like Game of Thrones that go over the events before the games, like all the events that you read about, it would genuinely be one of the most incredible fantasy media out there. Like, this is some Lord of the Rings level shit, you know? Which is why I'm kind of disappointed that the game takes place after it and we only learn about it after the fact and not take active part in any of it. Like all these lords and dragons and Seed the Scaleless and fallen warriors like Black Iron Tarkus. I just wish that our character could have anything personal going on with any of them at all, you know, rather than just facing them all one by one like a checklist because of this prophecy. Which brings us to the DLC. Now, I didn't play the DLC and you are probably screaming at your screen right now because of that, because the DLC is like easily the best part of the game. But unfortunately I missed it and only learned about it after I finished the game, which automatically sends you to New Game Plus. So I would have to like go over a large chunk of the game again to be able to get to it, and even then I would be playing like a harder version of it because it's New Game Plus, and I didn't want to really do that since I know how much harder compared to the base game that DLC is already. So I ended up watching all of it, and it is basically what I wish the main game was. Not only in terms of like boss quality and stuff, but also in terms of what I was just talking about. It being more personal, I mean. Like with how the Sif fight goes after you beat the DLC. I just wish the game was almost always like that instead of like how it usually is, which is just you fighting dudes because a snake told you to. I don't know. It's not like I hate the actual storyline of the chosen undead and breaking the curse and all that. That is also really cool in its own right. I just wish it wasn't all that we see firsthand. And as a final note, I kind of wish there was more music. Most of it is okay and some do stand out, but a lot of the game just being silent in terms of music is another one of those choices where I understand why they did it, but just like my wish for a more personal narrative, I just cannot help but think about the potential of having these beautiful ambient soundtracks for all the different areas in this game. Because like, just think of the few ambient soundtracks we get throughout the games, like the Majula theme, the Firelink Shrine theme, the Ash Lake Choir, and imagine if every single area had its unique theme like that. It would be such an incredible soundtrack overall, I think, and as it is, it's just fine in my opinion. Number 50, Dark Souls 2. So this game is infamously known as the worst in the series, but even then most people call it still a good game, just the worst in the trilogy relatively. So as you can tell, it's not really such a hated game situation, but with such an overwhelming consensus of this being the worst in the series, I was expecting the difference in quality between the first game and this to be much higher, but it wasn't. In fact, I'd say I enjoyed the two games about equally, at least if we're talking base games, because comparing them with the DLCs included just wouldn't be fair since I didn't play the first game's DLC. I didn't experience that firsthand, but I did experience the second game's DLC firsthand, and we will come to that, but first of all, let's go over the more general things. So, Dark Souls 2 has its problems, and I think the most significant of those are issues like hitboxes and my character just not wanting to listen to my inputs sometimes. So technical issues like that are the biggest obstacles in the way of having fun with this game, I'd say. Because even though they don't happen all the time, they're still frequent enough that in a challenging game like this, when it happens, when you're like about to beat a boss or something like that, you lose the fight because of dog shit hitboxes, it is really goddamn frustrating. Then there's also the issue with the base game boss roster being mid. There aren't any bosses that are as terrible as, say, Bed of Chaos or Seat the Scaleless, besides the Chariot boss, but that's optional, so it's fine. Relatively fine, I mean. Obviously, it's still an issue that a boss is bad at all, but it's at least not as bad as a mandatory boss being fucking terrible, you know? Other than that, every single base game boss almost is just a humanoid boss that is a bit larger than you with a shield and a stabby weapon, either a spear or a sword. And that sounds exciting as hell because those types of bosses in most games are usually more hype than the giant fucking demon monster type boss, you know, just a dude with a sword with maybe like a similar moveset to you. But this game somehow finds a way to make those boring, and I can't exactly tell you why. I can't exactly put my finger on why. I don't know if it's the movesets being boring or slow or what is it, but it's just not very fun to fight them. And I know it's not just a Souls game thing, because there are actually really fun humanoid bosses in the DLCs. Maybe it has to do with the fact that those, unlike the base game bosses, usually have multiple phases and are always more challenging. I don't know, but I'm not going to dwell on it too much and move on to the next bullet point, which is that things are even more obtuse and bullshit at times compared to the first game. So the first game had these moments I've already described when they were obtuse and you could only understand what you were supposed to do through notes and bloodstains. And in terms of information besides these essential like mechanics and how to progress, like with the lore and stuff like that, it would be even more obtuse than that. And what I mean by bullshit is when the games are just unfair to you straight up, like the rolling boulder at the beginning of Dark Souls 1 and that bridge with the dragon after you beat the Taurus demon. Stuff like that is even more abundant in Dark Souls 2, to a degree that is kind of frustrating, I would even say. Both obtuse and bullshit stuff, I mean. Like, you will open a door and it will be opening to nowhere but a drop and you will fucking die, for instance. There are some enemies that are just way more frustrating than anything in Dark Souls 1, such as those mummies that fucking leap at you and break your armor. There are way too many NPC invasions, though to be fair, you can also summon way more NPCs on your side as well. There are just like sections littered with not just player summon signs but actual NPC summon signs too. Like, they are way more abundant in this game. On top of that, there are many more types of healing items in this game too. So in some ways you could also say that the game is trying to make things easier for you this time, which brings us to the life gems, which at first seemed to me like they would be game breaking because like you can get an infinite number of them for so cheap. But since the game is more strict with your Estus flasks compared to the first one, I think they work fairly well to provide you with the healing that you need in the early game. And in the late game, you usually have your health at levels in which, you know, you don't really wish to spend 2 Estus flasks to heal it all the way, but 1 Estus flask and 1 life gem would be a perfect heal. There are a lot of those moments in the later parts of the game, so I don't know, it kind of works, I think. There's also the obvious scenario in which they can be broken if you stack the healing effects on top of each other, but it's not like there isn't an animation to break a life gem, and you can't actually like break 2 or 3 back to back in the same animation like you can drink 2 or 3 Estus flasks back to back. So even with the stacking heals, I don't feel that they're too powerful, since most bosses don't give you the room to pop 2 or 3 life gems back to back anyway. But besides healing, there's one other thing we need to address about your health, and that is the max HP reduction each time you die, which sounds like a horrible fucking idea from a design perspective, since the game would be making each consecutive try harder for you when you die, when you're supposed to get closer and closer to beating the boss each time under the same conditions. Like, it sounds like a system that is against the very nature of trying, of practicing, you know? Like, how am I supposed to be motivated to try over and over until I beat this boss when you're punishing me for every time I try and making things harder for me each time? But the thing is, humanity in this game is actually so abundant, or rather human effigies I guess with their new name, that I never had to endure that much of a reduction to my maximum HP anytime. I would like pop a human effigy after like 2 or 3 tries each time to return to human forms. Like, I never let my HP get below like 70% or so, and even then I always had so much more to spare in my inventory, even though like I popped that them left and right constantly, that I feel this doesn't really affect the game that positively or negatively one way or the other. You just have to click on a thing in your inventory every now and then in between your tries. Like, the only side effect I can think of is that you can try summoning people much more frequently this way, because you're constantly turning back to human form to max out your health again, which makes it really weird that summon signs are only available when you're human, because it ends up making summon signs only available when you're at your strongest. Like, ideally you would expect the game to offer you the option of getting some support from other people when you're really struggling and really need that extra helping hand, like when you're at max hollowing or something, you know, when you're at 50% of your max HP. That's when you would really need a summon, not when you're at like full HP. Like, the first game also had summons only available when you were human, but you were always at max health then, so the cost was really like spending a piece of humanity to call in a summon, and humanity was not as abundant in that game, so it worked better that the summons were only available when you were human. Here, with both human effigies and summon signs being so abundant, it just makes everything weird. I guess the boss's HP scaling with how many summons you have kind of balances things out, but I don't know. I think this part of the game's mechanics needed to be tweaked a little from the first game to work better here with the current like HP reduction system. We also have to address the huge elephant in the room, that is ADP. ADP is a fucking horrible stat, but fast roll being up to 70% weight in this game more than makes up for it, so overall I'm not too upset. Like, even with the endurance stat from the first game being split into two separate stats, I was able to level up everything as much as I wanted and still have a large enough stamina pool and the weight limit letting me carry as much shit as I wanted. When in the first game I was not able to wear any heavy armor at all, even with light dex weapons, without like breaking my fast roll. Here I was able to carry like two heavy strength weapons, wear a full set of knight armor and still be able to fast roll, and it was fucking amazing. And while we're on the topic of stats, I should also mention that being able to respec them is fucking amazing. I waited to be able to do that in the first game for so long, and I was so disappointed that it never let me. And one other thing that the first game didn't let me was being able to teleport between any two bonfire rather than the select bonfires that it picked for me in that one. And not only are you able to teleport between any two bonfire in this game, but you're also able to do that from the very beginning, which is fucking fantastic. There is such an amazing quality of life change that these two things, along with the weight limit being all the way up at 70% that I just mentioned, are the main reasons. A lot of people focus on its flaws and shit on it, but I think this game takes just as many steps forward overall as it takes back. And again, this is just the base game. If we put the DLCs into equation, I fucking loved this game. The DLCs carry this game so goddamn hard. The bosses are much better and more varied. The level design is fucking top notch, especially in the Iron King DLC, and it expands on the base game's lore in such an amazing way. I think that the base game of Dark Souls 2 didn't have as much of a good lore as the base game of Dark Souls 1, but the DLCs change that and make those two equal, I think. These three mysterious kings with their DLCs really add a lot to the game overall, I think. The two things in these DLCs that annoyed me though are two specific bosses. One of them is the blue smelter demon, and the other one is the two pets of the Ivory King, Lad and Zolan. These are two very tough bosses, obviously, but I'm fine with that. It's just that their runbacks are so annoying that these two bosses ended up being the only ones I could find but didn't defeat in this game because I just couldn't stand how annoying the runbacks were. Thankfully, they were very optional bosses, so it didn't end up being too detrimental to my run overall. I didn't end up missing much. With all of that being said, we are finally done with this huge list. Normally, I would be moving on to the list of future games that I want to play and explain why I got my eye on them, but this first episode has been way too long and I'm really tired of working on it, so for this once I'm going to keep it as a secret as to what the next games are going to be. And I mean, it's more fun that way anyway with the mystery. You never know what my next review might be that way, so if you want to find that out, stay tuned as always, but don't expect anything until June because I'm going to be away at mandatory military service actually during April and May. Until then, take care of yourselves as always and thank you for watching.